The water closed over Olivia Thorne's head for the third time, her lungs burning as the furious current of the North Platte River dragged her downstream like a rag doll. And in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die. Her arms flailed uselessly against the rushing water, her heavy skirts tangling around her legs like iron chains. The spring runoff of 1878 had swollen the river to twice its normal size, and what should have been a careful crossing had turned into a nightmare when her horse had stumbled on the submerged rocks. She had been thrown clear, watching helplessly as her mare scrambled to the opposite bank, while Olivia was swept away by the merciless torrent. The riverbank blurred past her, cottonwood trees and sage brush nothing more than green and gray streaks in her fading vision. Her fingers scraped against a rock, tearing the skin, but she could not find purchase. The cold mountain water sapped the strength from her limbs, and she felt herself going under again, the world turning dark and muffled. Then something solid struck her, an arm wrapping around her chest with iron strength. She gasped, choking on water and air simultaneously as she felt herself being pulled against the current. Her rescuer grunted with effort, his other arm cutting through the water with powerful strokes. She could feel the steady thud of his heartbeat against her back, could feel the strain in his muscles as he fought the river that had nearly claimed her life. "Hold on," a rough voice commanded near her ear. "Just hold on." Olivia tried to help, tried to kick her legs, but the sodden weight of her dress made her useless. She could only cling to the arm across her chest and trust this stranger who had materialized from nowhere to save her. The current fought them for every inch, but slowly, agonizingly, they moved closer to the shore. Her rescuer's boots finally found purchase on the river bottom, and he half carried, half dragged her up the muddy bank. They collapsed together on the grass, both gasping for breath. Olivia rolled onto her side, coughing violently as water streamed from her mouth and nose. Her entire body shook with cold and shock, her fingers digging into the earth just to feel something solid beneath her. She was alive, impossibly, miraculously alive. "You all right, miss?" The voice came again, concerned and breathless. Olivia turned her head and found herself looking at a man who appeared to be only a few years older than her own 22 years. Water dripped from his dark hair, plastering it to his forehead. His brown eyes studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with her near drowning. He was soaked through, his shirt clinging to broad shoulders, his hat lost somewhere to the river. "I think so," she managed, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." "Saw you go under from up the ridge," he said, pushing himself to a sitting position. "Rode down fast as I could. Name's Marcus Young. Olivia Thorne." She sat up slowly, testing her limbs. Everything ached, but nothing seemed broken. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Young." "I thought I was done for." Marcus shook his head, water droplets flying from his hair. "Just glad I got here in time. That river does not give second chances this time of year." He looked around, taking stock of their situation. "Where were you headed?" "Your horse made it across, but I reckon she kept running." Olivia's heart sank. Everything she owned had been in her saddlebags. "I was traveling to Opal. My aunt lives there. She runs a boarding house, and I was coming to help her manage it." She looked down at herself, taking in her ruined dress and scraped hands. "Though I suppose I look more like a drowned cat than any help at all now." A smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's mouth, transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made Olivia's stomach flutter in a way she had never experienced before. "Well, Miss Thorne, it just so happens I was headed to Opal myself. My ranch is about 5 miles north of town. If you can ride double, my horse is up on that ridge, and I would be honored to see you safely to your aunt's door." I could not impose after you have already risked your life for me, Olivia protested, even as relief flooded through her. Marcus stood and extended his hand to her. Miss Thorne, I just jumped in a flooding river. Riding a few miles is hardly an imposition. His hand was calloused and warm, his grip firm as he pulled her to her feet. Olivia swayed slightly, her head spinning, and Marcus steadied her with a hand at her elbow. Standing this close, she could see the concern in his eyes, the way his jaw was set with determination. He was clean-shaven, unlike many of the cowboys she had seen on her journey west, and there was something about him that spoke of reliability and strength. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. Olivia nodded, not trusting her voice. The reality of what had just happened was settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had nearly died. If Marcus had been even a minute later, if he had not seen her go under, she would be floating downriver right now, lifeless and alone. Her eyes stung with tears that had nothing to do with the river water. Marcus seemed to sense her distress. He did not comment on it, just kept a steadying hand on her arm as they made their way up the steep bank to where a beautiful buckskin gelding stood ground-tied, grazing peacefully as if his owner had not just performed a heroic rescue. The horse lifted his head as they approached, nickering softly. "This is Dusty," Marcus said, gathering the reins. "He has a gentle disposition. He will not mind carrying double for a bit." Marcus mounted first, then reached down for Olivia. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his and allowing him to pull her up behind him. It was improper, certainly, to be sitting this close to a man she had just met, but propriety seemed a small concern when that man had just saved her from drowning. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the warmth of him through his wet shirt. "Hold tight," Marcus said, and urged Dusty into a steady walk. They rode in silence for a while, following a well-worn trail that led away from the river. The May sun was warm on Olivia's back, slowly drying her clothes, though she continued to shiver. The Wyoming landscape stretched out around them, endless rolling hills covered in spring grass, with the mountains rising in the distance like gray sentinels. It was beautiful and vast and utterly foreign to someone who had spent her entire life in Boston. "What brings you to Wyoming, Miss Thorne?" Marcus asked eventually, "If you do not mind my asking." "My father passed away 6 months ago," Olivia said quietly. "He was a banker in Boston. When he died, I discovered he had accumulated considerable debts. The house had to be sold to satisfy his creditors. My mother died when I was very young, and I have no siblings. My Aunt Margaret wrote and offered me a home here in Opal. She said she could use the help with her boarding house, and I had nowhere else to go." She felt Marcus's back stiffen slightly. "I am sorry about your father. Thank you. He was a good man, just unlucky in his investments." Olivia watched the landscape roll by, trying not to think about how her entire world had crumbled in the space of a few months. "I have never been west before. Everything here is so different from Boston." "I imagine it is quite a change," Marcus agreed. "But Opal is a good town, decent people for the most part. Your aunt's boarding house has a fine reputation. My men stay there sometimes when they come into town." "Your men? You mentioned a ranch," the Broken Arrow. "My father started it 15 years ago when he came out from Missouri. He passed 2 years back and it became mine. We run about 300 head of cattle, have 4 permanent hands, and hire on extra during roundup and drives." There was pride in his voice, but also something else. "Weariness, perhaps, or loneliness." "That sounds like a great deal of work," Olivia said. "It is, but it is good work, honest work." Marcus shifted slightly in the saddle. "Truth is, I came down to Opal today to buy supplies and to check on a mare I sold to the blacksmith last month. I was heading back home when I saw you go into the river." "Divine providence," Olivia murmured. Maybe so. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now. Olivia found herself very aware of the solid warmth of Marcus's body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the competent way he handled the reins. She had known him less than an hour, but there was something about him that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her father died. It was strange and a little frightening how much she already trusted this man who was essentially a stranger. The trail crested a hill, and suddenly Opal lay spread before them. It was larger than Olivia had expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, houses spreading out in all directions, and the spire of a church rising above it all. Smoke curled from chimneys, and she could see people moving about their business, horses and wagons creating a steady flow of traffic. "There she is," Marcus said. "Opal, Wyoming. Your new home." Olivia's throat tightened. Home. She had not had a real home since her father's death. The weeks since had been spent in borrowed rooms and train cars, always moving, never settling. The thought that she might actually have a place to belong again made her eyes sting with fresh tears. Marcus guided Dusty down the main street, nodding to a few people who called out greetings. Olivia was acutely conscious of the picture they must make, both soaked through, riding double on a single horse. She could already feel curious eyes on them, could imagine the gossip that would spread through the small town before nightfall. "Your aunt's place is just ahead," Marcus said, pointing to a large two-story house painted white with green shutters. A sign hung from the porch that read Thorne's boarding house in neat letters. "Looks like she kept your father's name for the business." Before Olivia could respond, the front door burst open, and a woman emerged. She was in her early 40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple calico dress with an apron, and her face registered shock as she took in the sodden pair on horseback. "Olivia," she called, hurrying down the steps. "Good Lord, child, what happened to you?" Marcus drew Dusty to a halt and dismounted, then reached up to help Olivia down. Her legs trembled as they took her weight, and she was grateful for his steadying hand. "Aunt Margaret," Olivia said, finding her voice. "I apologize for arriving in such a state. I had an accident crossing the river. My horse threw me and I was swept away by the current. Mr. Young here saved my life and brought me to town." Margaret Thorne's hand flew to her mouth, her face going pale. "The North Platte, in spring runoff. Oh, my dear child, you could have been killed." She turned to Marcus, her eyes filling with tears. "Mr. Young, I cannot begin to thank you enough. You have given me back my only niece." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to such effusive gratitude. "Just did what anyone would do, madam." "Not anyone would jump into that river," Margaret said firmly. She grasped his hand in both of hers, shaking it vigorously. "You are a hero, sir, and I will not hear otherwise. Please come inside. Both of you need dry clothes and hot food." "That is very kind, Mrs. Thorne, but I should be getting back to the ranch," Marcus said. "I have chores waiting, and it is a good ride back." "Nonsense," Margaret said in a tone that brooked no argument. "You will catch your death riding home in wet clothes. I insist you at least come in for coffee and something to eat while your clothes dry by the fire. It is the very least I can do." Marcus looked at Olivia and something passed between them. A connection, fragile but real, like a spider's silk catching the light. "I suppose I could spare an hour," he said finally. Margaret ushered them both inside, calling for her hired girl to fetch towels and blankets. The boarding house was warm and welcoming, with comfortable furniture and the smell of baking bread filling the air. Several boarders looked up curiously from the parlor as the soggy pair entered, and Margaret quickly shooed them away, declaring that privacy was needed. Olivia was sent upstairs to her new room to change into dry clothes, while Marcus was provided with a blanket to wrap himself in, as his clothes were hung by the kitchen stove. When Olivia came back down 15 minutes later, dressed in a simple blue cotton dress with her damp hair braided down her back, she found Marcus sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a plate of bread and butter before him. He had combed his fingers through his hair, pushing it back from his forehead, and even wrapped in a blanket he somehow managed to look dignified. Margaret was already plying him with questions about his ranch, his family, his prospects. Olivia felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment at her aunt's transparent interrogation, but Marcus handled it with grace, answering politely while focusing most of his attention on his food. "Aunt Margaret, I am sure Mr. Young does not wish to be interrogated," Olivia said, sliding into a chair across from him. "I am merely making conversation," Margaret said, but she had the grace to look slightly abashed. She poured coffee for Olivia, then added, "I suppose I am just grateful to you, Mr. Young. Olivia is all the family I have left. Her father was my younger brother, and when I heard about his passing and her situation, I could not bear the thought of her alone in the world." "Family is important," Marcus agreed. He looked at Olivia over the rim of his coffee cup. "How are you feeling, Miss Thorne? That was quite an ordeal." "Better now," Olivia said, wrapping her hands around her own cup to absorb its warmth. "Though I confess everything feels a bit unreal. This morning I was on a stagecoach, and now here I am, having nearly drowned and been rescued by a complete stranger who turns out to be one of the kindest men I have ever met." Marcus looked down at his plate, but not before Olivia saw the flush creep up his neck. "I am sure you would have done the same if our positions were reversed." "I like to think so, though I am not certain I would have had the courage to jump into that river." "It was not courage," Marcus said quietly. "It was just the right thing to do. I could not have lived with myself if I had not tried." The simple honesty in his words touched something deep in Olivia's chest. In Boston, the men she had known had been all polish and pretense, always aware of social standing and propriety. Marcus Young was something entirely different. He was direct and honest, a man who did what needed doing without thought for glory or reward. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily despite having just met. Marcus told them about life on the ranch, about the challenges of running a cattle operation in Wyoming's harsh climate. Olivia shared stories of Boston, of the theater and museums, though she carefully avoided mentioning the painful final months after her father's death. Margaret added her own tales of Opal, of the various characters who populated the town and boarded at her establishment. Eventually, Marcus's clothes had dried enough for him to dress, and he reluctantly announced that he really did need to start back. The sun was already sinking toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Thank you again for everything, Mr. Young," Olivia said, walking with him to the porch where Dusty waited patiently. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." Marcus swung into the saddle with easy grace. He looked down at her, and in the golden light of late afternoon his eyes seemed to hold entire worlds. "No debt, Miss Thorne, but I would like to call on you again if you would permit it, perhaps when you are more settled." Olivia's heart leaped. "I would like that very much. Then I will see you soon." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, nodded to Margaret who had joined them on the porch, and guided Dusty into an easy lope down the street. Olivia watched until he disappeared around a corner, then realized her aunt was watching her with a knowing smile. "Do not say it," Olivia warned. "I did not say anything," Margaret replied innocently. "I was merely thinking what a fine young man Marcus Young is. Handsome, hardworking, owns his own ranch and brave enough to jump into a flooding river to save a stranger. A girl could do worse. Aunt Margaret, I have known him for all of 2 hours. Sometimes 2 hours is enough to know, Margaret said, linking her arm through Olivia's and leading her back inside. Your Uncle Thomas and I knew within an hour of meeting that we would marry. We had 43 good years together before he passed. Time is not always the measure of a connection, my dear. Olivia wanted to argue, but she could not deny the flutter in her chest when she thought of Marcus Young, of his strong arms pulling her from the river, of the way his eyes had softened when he smiled. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. He had saved her life. Of course she felt drawn to him, but deep down she suspected it was something more. That night, Olivia lay in her new bed in her new room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Opal settling in for the night. Through her window she could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, brighter and more numerous than she had ever seen in Boston. The room was simply furnished but clean and comfortable, with a quilt her aunt had made covering the bed and lace curtains at the window. She should have been exhausted, but sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the river closing over her head, felt the panic of being unable to breathe. And then she felt Marcus's arm around her, solid and sure, pulling her to safety. She touched her chest where his arm had been, remembering the steady beat of his heart against her back. Somewhere out there, 5 miles north in a ranch house she had never seen, was the man who had saved her life. Was he sleeping? Was he thinking of her as she was thinking of him? The thought seemed impossibly forward, but she could not help herself. In the space of a single day, her entire life had changed. She had arrived in Opal expecting to start over, to rebuild from the ruins of her old life. She had not expected to nearly die. And she certainly had not expected to meet someone like Marcus Young. Over the following days, Olivia settled into her new life in Opal. Margaret's boarding house catered to a variety of guests, from traveling salesmen to miners passing through on their way to the gold fields further west. Olivia threw herself into the work, helping with cooking and cleaning, changing linens and serving meals. It was hard physical labor, so different from her life in Boston, but she found satisfaction in it. There was something honest about work that left you tired at the end of the day, something real that her previous life of social calls and needlework had lacked. Margaret proved to be excellent company, full of stories and practical wisdom. She had moved to Wyoming with her husband 20 years earlier, following the promise of a new life in the West. Thomas Thorne had been a carpenter, and he had built the boarding house with his own hands. When he died 5 years ago, Margaret had continued running it alone, earning a reputation for cleanliness, good food, and fair prices. "This house has been my salvation," Margaret told Olivia one evening as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing supper for the 6 men currently in residence. "After Thomas passed, I did not know what I would do, but keeping busy, keeping this place running, it gave me purpose. I hope it can do the same for you, dear." "It already has," Olivia assured her, rolling out biscuit dough. "I feel useful here. In Boston, after Father died, I felt like such a burden on everyone. His friends were kind, but I could see the pity in their eyes. Here, no one knows my story. I can just be myself." "And what about Marcus Young?" Margaret asked, her tone carefully casual. "Has he been part of your settling in?" Olivia felt her cheeks warm. In truth, she had not seen Marcus since that first day, though she found herself watching the street whenever she had a spare moment, hoping to catch sight of him riding into town. "He said he would call, but I imagine he is busy with his ranch." Margaret said, but she was smiling. "Well, it has only been 4 days. Give the man time. Running a ranch is demanding work, especially this time of year." As if summoned by their conversation, there was a knock at the front door. Margaret's eyes twinkled. "Would you get that, dear? My hands are covered in flour." Olivia wiped her own hands on her apron and went to answer the door. Her heart began to race before she even turned the knob, some instinct telling her who she would find on the other side. Marcus Young stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking scrubbed clean and slightly nervous. He wore a pressed shirt and his best pants, and his dark hair was still damp as if he had recently bathed. In his other hand, he held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual, "I hope I am not calling at an inconvenient time." "Not at all," Olivia managed, trying to control the smile that wanted to spread across her face. "Please come in." Marcus stepped inside, seeming to fill the entryway with his presence. He held out the flowers, a collection of prairie roses and lupines. "These are for you. I know they are not fancy like you probably had in Boston, but they grow wild on my land and I thought you might like them." "They are beautiful," Olivia said, taking the bouquet and burying her nose in the delicate blooms. "Much prettier than anything from a florist's shop. Thank you." Margaret appeared from the kitchen, still wiping flour from her hands, her face alight with pleasure. "Mr. Young, what a lovely surprise. Will you stay for supper? We have plenty." "I would not want to impose," Marcus began, but Margaret waved away his protest. "Nonsense. You saved my niece's life. You have a standing invitation to any meal in this house for the rest of your days. Olivia, why don't you show Mr. Young to the parlor while I finish in the kitchen? Supper will be ready in about 30 minutes. Olivia led Marcus to the boarding house's parlor, a comfortable room with mismatched but cozy furniture and a stone fireplace. The other boarders were absent, likely at one of the saloons in town, leaving them a rare moment of privacy. "How have you been?" Marcus asked as they settled into chairs near the window. "Any lasting effects from your swim?" "Just a few bruises and a healthy respect for rivers," Olivia said. "And nightmares the first few nights, but those have passed. How are things at your ranch? Busy?" "We are preparing for the drive to market next month. Have to separate out which cattle we are selling, make sure the rest have enough grazing." He paused, then added, "Truth is, I have been thinking about you, about that day. I wanted to come sooner, but I did not want to seem too forward." Olivia's heart swelled. "I have been thinking about you too, about what you did. I keep trying to imagine what would have happened if you had not been there, and it terrifies me." "Do not think about that," Marcus said firmly. "You are here, you are safe. That is what matters." They talked until Margaret called them for supper, the conversation flowing as easily as it had that first day. Olivia found herself telling Marcus things she had not shared with anyone, about her fears for the future, about her grief for her father, about the strangeness of starting over in a place so different from everything she had known. Marcus listened with complete attention, offering comfort and understanding without empty platitudes. In turn, he shared his own struggles, the loneliness of running the ranch alone, the weight of responsibility he had inherited too young when his father died. "Pa always made it look easy," Marcus said, pushing food around his plate. "But there is so much to manage. The hands are good men, but they need direction. The cattle need tending. The land needs care. Some days I feel like I am barely keeping my head above water." "But you do keep it above water," Olivia pointed out. "You keep going, you keep the ranch running. That takes courage." Marcus looked at her, something warm and grateful in his eyes. "Thank you for saying that." After supper, Marcus lingered on the porch, clearly reluctant to leave. The night was mild, with a breeze carrying the scent of sage and prairie grass. Somewhere down the street, a piano played in one of the saloons, the sound drifting through the darkness. "Miss Thorne," Marcus began, then stopped and started again. "Olivia, if I may be so bold." I realize we have not known each other long, but I find myself drawn to you in a way I have not experienced before. Would you allow me to court you properly? I know you have only just arrived and you may need time to settle, but I wanted you to know my intentions." Olivia's breath caught. She looked at this man who had risked his life for hers, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who made her feel things she had never felt before. Every practical bone in her body said she should be cautious, should take her time, should not rush into anything. But her heart had other ideas. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Marcus's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Then I will call on you again soon. Maybe I could take you riding, show you some of the countryside, if your aunt can spare you for an afternoon." "I would love that." He held her hand a moment longer, then reluctantly released it. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Marcus." She watched him ride away into the darkness, and when she finally went inside, she found Margaret waiting with a knowing smile. "Do not say I told you so," Olivia warned. "I would not dream of it," Margaret replied, but her eyes danced with delight. True to his word, Marcus came calling regularly over the following weeks. He took Olivia riding through the rolling hills around Opal, showing her the vast spaces of the Wyoming landscape. He pointed out landmarks, taught her to identify the different types of grasses that fed the cattle, showed her where pronghorn antelope grazed in the early morning. Olivia had never spent much time outdoors in Boston, but she found herself falling in love with the wild beauty of the West. More than the landscape, though, she was falling in love with Marcus. It crept up on her slowly at first, then all at once. She loved the way he sat a horse, the easy confidence in his movements. She loved the way he treated animals with gentle respect. She loved his quiet strength, the way he never boasted but simply did what needed doing. She loved his laugh, rare but genuine, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. She loved how he listened to her, really listened, treating her opinions and thoughts as valuable rather than dismissing them as many men did. One particularly beautiful June afternoon, Marcus took her to see the Broken Arrow Ranch. Olivia's breath caught as they crested the final hill, and the ranch spread out before them. The main house was a sturdy log structure with a wide porch, nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. Barns and corrals spread out behind the house, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the green grass. "It is beautiful," she breathed. Marcus looked pleased. "My father chose this spot because of the creek. Water is everything out here. Without it, the land is worthless." He guided his horse down toward the house, Olivia following on the gentle mare he had borrowed from the livery for her use. The house is not fancy, but it is solid, keeps out the winter wind and stays cool in summer. As they approached, several men emerged from the barn, wiping their hands on their pants. They studied Olivia with open curiosity, and she felt suddenly self-conscious in her simple riding skirt and blouse. "Boys, this is Miss Olivia Thorne," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of pride. "Olivia, these are my hands. That is Tom, Jake, Pete, and young Rusty." The men touched their hats respectfully. They were a rough-looking bunch, weathered by sun and wind, but their eyes were kind. Tom, who appeared to be the oldest, grinned at Marcus. "So this is the young lady you fished out of the North Platte," he said. "We heard all about it when the boss came home soaked to the skin. Said he found the prettiest girl in Wyoming nearly drowning and could not let that stand." "Tom," Marcus said warningly, but his ears had gone red. Olivia laughed, delighted. "He told you that, did he?" "Might have embellished a bit in the retelling," Jake admitted with a wink. "But the boss has not stopped talking about you since. It is Miss Thorne this and Miss Thorne that until we are all sick of hearing it." "All right, that is enough," Marcus said, but there was no real heat in his words. "Do not you all have work to do?" The men scattered, still grinning, and Marcus shook his head ruefully. "I apologize for them. They are good workers, but they have no sense of propriety." "I think they are wonderful," Olivia said warmly, "and I am flattered that you talk about me." "Constantly," Marcus admitted. He swung down from his horse and came to help her dismount. His hand spanned her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood close together, his face just inches from hers. Olivia's breath caught. She could see gold flecks in his brown eyes, could smell the clean scent of soap and sunshine on his skin. "Olivia," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "These past few weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know it is soon, but I cannot help how I feel. I am falling in love with you." "Marcus," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs, "I am falling in love with you too." He smiled and then, very slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, his lips warm against hers, and Olivia felt the world narrow down to just this moment. Just the two of them standing in the sunshine while the wind whispered through the grass and the creek babbled its eternal song. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know we should wait, but life is uncertain. You almost died in that river. I do not want to waste a single moment we could have together. Marry me, Olivia. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Marcus, I will marry you." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and clung to his shoulders. From the barn, she heard whoops and hollers as the ranch hands celebrated, clearly having been eavesdropping despite Marcus's dismissal. They were married 3 weeks later in Opal's small church, with Margaret crying happily and the entire town turning out to witness the union. Olivia wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that matched the bouquet Marcus had brought her that first evening. Marcus wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited at the altar. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, the words taking on profound meaning as Olivia looked into Marcus's eyes and promised to love him for the rest of her life. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Margaret outdoing herself preparing food. The ranch hands were there, along with half the town, everyone eager to celebrate the match between the cowboy hero and the girl he had saved from the river. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon the parlor had been cleared for dancing. Olivia danced with her new husband, his arms strong around her as they swayed to the music. "Happy?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. "So happy I can barely stand it," she replied honestly. "I came to Wyoming expecting to hide away in my aunt's boarding house to just survive. Instead, I found you. I found a reason to truly live. I will spend every day trying to deserve you," Marcus promised. They left the reception as the sun was setting, riding out to the Broken Arrow together. Olivia sat in front of Marcus on Dusty, his arms around her, her head resting against his chest. The ranch house glowed golden in the twilight, looking like something from a dream. Marcus had spent the past week preparing for her arrival, cleaning the house from top to bottom, filling it with little touches he thought she might like. There were wildflowers in a mason jar on the kitchen table, new curtains at the windows, a quilt on the bed that had belonged to his mother. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," he said, carrying her over the threshold. That night, Olivia lay in her husband's arms, listening to his steady breathing as he slept. Through the open window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the yip of distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through the grass. It was all so different from her old life, but it felt absolutely right. She thought about the river, about that moment when she had been certain she was going to die. In a strange way, she had died that day. The old Olivia, the lost and grieving girl from Boston, had been swept away by the current. The woman who had emerged from the river was someone new, someone stronger and braver. And she had Marcus to thank for that, not just for saving her life, but for showing her what life could be. Life on the ranch proved to be harder than Olivia had imagined, but also more rewarding. She learned to cook for hungry ranch hands, to manage a household with limited resources, to make do and mend and stretch every penny. Marcus taught her to ride properly, and soon she was confident enough to help move cattle from one pasture to another. She learned to identify the different cattle by their markings, learned which cows were good mothers and which needed extra watching during calving season. The ranch hands treated her with respect bordering on reverence, and Olivia soon discovered why. Women were scarce in Wyoming territory, and a woman who was willing to work alongside men who did not put on airs was worth her weight in gold. Tom, the oldest hand, took to calling her boss lady with affectionate respect, but it was not all work. Marcus made sure they carved out time for each other, taking her on picnics to beautiful spots on the ranch, teaching her to fish in the creek, showing her the hidden wonders of their land. They talked for hours, sharing their pasts, their dreams for the future, learning each other's hearts and minds as thoroughly as they had learned each other's bodies. Summer gave way to fall, the grass turning gold and the air taking on a crisp edge. Marcus and his men drove the cattle to market in Cheyenne, and Olivia spent anxious weeks waiting for his return. When he finally rode back, sunburned and exhausted but triumphant, she flew into his arms right there in the ranch yard, not caring that the men were watching. "We got a good price," Marcus told her that night as they lay together. "Enough to buy those horses I wanted and still have money left for supplies. We are going to make it, Olivia. The ranch is going to succeed." "I never doubted it," she said, tracing patterns on his chest. "Not with you running it." As the days grew shorter and colder, they prepared for winter. Marcus and the hands repaired the barn, checking for gaps that would let in the brutal Wyoming wind. They laid in supplies, knowing that once the snow started, trips to town might be impossible for weeks at a time. Olivia canned vegetables from her small garden, put up preserves, and made sure they had plenty of dried goods stored away. The first snow came in November, a light dusting that made the world look magical. But the real storms arrived in December, howling blizzards that buried the ranch in white and made going from the house to the barn a dangerous expedition. The hands moved into the bunkhouse attached to the barn so they could tend the animals without risking the journey back and forth. Olivia had been nervous about being snowed in, worried that the isolation might be oppressive. Instead, she found herself cherishing these quiet months with Marcus. They sat by the fire in the evenings, Marcus mending tack or working on ranch accounts, while Olivia sewed or read aloud from the few books they owned. They made love slowly, luxuriously, with nowhere to be and all the time in the world. On Christmas morning, Olivia woke to find Marcus already up stoking the fire. When she emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in a shawl, she found a small carved wooden box sitting on the table. "Merry Christmas," Marcus said, looking pleased with himself. Olivia opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain. She opened it to find a tiny photograph of Marcus on one side, though she had no idea where he had gotten it taken. "The other side is for you," he explained. or for whoever else you want to put in there. I know it is not much, but I wanted you to have something special. It is perfect, Olivia said, her eyes filling with tears. She fastened it around her neck, then pulled out her own gift. It was a new pair of work gloves she had spent weeks sewing, made from the softest leather she could find and lined with wool against the cold. I know they are practical rather than romantic, but I noticed your old ones were falling apart. Marcus examined the gloves with genuine appreciation. They are wonderful, thank you. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. This has been the best year of my life, Olivia. Finding you, marrying you, building a life together. I could not ask for more. I love you, she whispered against his chest. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Olivia began to suspect she might be pregnant. She missed her monthly courses, felt queasy in the mornings, and noticed her dresses growing tighter around the waist. She waited to tell Marcus until she was certain, afraid to raise his hopes only to be wrong. But by March, there was no doubt. She chose a quiet evening after supper to share the news, watching Marcus's face as she spoke the words, "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Marcus simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then immediately set her down looking stricken. "I should not have done that. Are you all right? Should you be sitting down? Do you need anything?" Olivia laughed at his sudden panic. "I am fine. I am pregnant, not made of glass. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." But Marcus was already fussing over her, insisting she sit while he made tea, declaring that she was not to do any heavy work anymore. Olivia found his concern endearing even as she protested that she was perfectly capable of doing everything she had been doing. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Olivia bloomed with health, her skin glowing and her body growing round with their child. Marcus was attentive to the point of distraction, constantly checking on her, bringing her little gifts, worrying about everything from what she ate to whether she was getting enough rest. Margaret came out to the ranch regularly, bringing supplies and advice from her years of helping with births in Opal. She declared that Olivia was doing splendidly and predicted an easy delivery. On a warm October morning, Olivia's labor began. Marcus rode into town at breakneck speed to fetch the midwife and Margaret, then proceeded to pace the ranch house like a caged animal while the women worked. Tom and the other hands tried to distract him, but Marcus was beyond distraction, jumping at every sound from the bedroom. After 6 hours of labor, Olivia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the midwife finally allowed Marcus into the room, he approached the bed as if walking on sacred ground. Olivia lay exhausted but radiant, holding their son. "Meet your son," she said softly. Marcus sank down on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny red-faced infant in wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Olivia corrected. She placed the baby in Marcus's arms, showing him how to support the head. What should we name him? They had discussed names but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Marcus said, "What about Samuel, after your father?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Her father's name had been Samuel, though everyone had called him Sam. "That would be perfect. Samuel Thomas Young, after both our fathers." Marcus kissed her forehead, then gazed down at his son. "Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the Broken Arrow." Little Samuel proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong despite being born a month early. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and he quickly became the center of their universe. Olivia marveled at how much love she had in her heart for this tiny person, how fiercely protective she felt. Marcus was a devoted father, surprising Olivia with how natural he was with the baby. He had no qualms about changing nappies or walking the floor with Samuel when he was fussy. The ranch hands were equally smitten, taking turns visiting the house to admire the newest member of the Broken Arrow family. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Good prices for cattle and favorable weather allowed Marcus to expand the herd and make improvements to the property. He built a larger barn and hired 2 more permanent hands. Olivia started a vegetable garden that soon supplied not just the ranch but several families in town. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. They worked hard, but they also made time for joy. Marcus taught Samuel to ride before he could barely walk, sitting the boy in front of him on Dusty while they made gentle circuits of the ranch yard. Olivia watched from the porch, her heart full to bursting at the sight of her 2 favorite people together. When Samuel was 3, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, with more sickness and exhaustion. She tried to hide it from Marcus, not wanting to worry him, but he knew her too well. "You need to rest more," he insisted. "Let me hire someone to help with the house." "We cannot afford that," Olivia protested. "We can and we will. Your health is more important than a few dollars." He hired a young woman from town named Jenny to help with cooking and cleaning. Jenny was sweet and hardworking, and Olivia was grateful for the assistance even if it chafed at her pride to need it. In the spring of 1882, Olivia gave birth to a daughter. This labor was longer and more difficult than Samuel's had been, and there were moments when Olivia feared something was wrong. But at last, the baby emerged, smaller than Samuel had been but with a lusty cry that announced her arrival to the world. "A daughter," Margaret announced, placing the baby on Olivia's chest. "You have a beautiful baby girl." Marcus, who had spent the entire labor pacing and praying, finally came into the room. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at his wife and new daughter. "Are you all right?" He asked Olivia first. "I am tired, but I will be fine. Come meet your daughter." They named her Rose after the wild prairie roses that had been in the first bouquet Marcus gave Olivia. Rose Young was a serious baby, watching the world with solemn dark eyes. Samuel was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. The years flowed by like water, each season bringing its own challenges and rewards. Samuel grew tall and strong, following his father around the ranch and learning the business of cattle. Rose proved to have her mother's stubborn determination, insisting on doing everything her brother did despite being younger and smaller. When Samuel was 8 and Rose was 5, Olivia gave birth to twin boys, Robert and James. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth was complicated by the fact that she was carrying 2 babies. For a terrifying hour, Olivia hemorrhaged badly, and there was real fear that she might not survive. But Margaret and the doctor Marcus had fetched from Cheyenne managed to stop the bleeding, and both babies emerged healthy if small. "No more," Marcus said firmly when it was all over, holding Olivia's hand while she drifted in and out of consciousness. "I almost lost you. I cannot go through that again." Olivia, too exhausted to argue, simply squeezed his hand. They had 4 healthy children and a thriving ranch. Their family was complete. As the twins grew, the ranch house that had once seemed spacious began to feel cramped. In 1888, Marcus began building an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and enlarging the kitchen. Samuel, now 12, helped with the construction, learning carpentry alongside ranching. Olivia watched her family grow with pride and contentment. Samuel was turning into a younger version of his father, responsible and hardworking. Rose was sharp as a tack, already reading better than children twice her age. The twins were energetic and mischievous, keeping everyone on their toes. On quiet evenings when the children were finally asleep, and she sat with Marcus on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie, Olivia sometimes thought back to that day in the river. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet also like yesterday. She had been so lost then, so adrift. And then Marcus had pulled her from the water and her whole life had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About how lucky I am. About how different my life could have been if you had not seen me go into that river." Marcus pulled her closer. "I was the lucky one. I found a treasure in that water." "We both were lucky," Olivia said. She looked out at the ranch spread before them, at the home they had built together, at the life they had created. "I love you, Marcus Young, more today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow." "That sounds like a poem," Marcus teased gently. "Maybe it is. Maybe our whole life together is a kind of poetry." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. From inside the house came the sounds of their children settling for the night, Samuel reading to the twins while Rose played with her dolls. These were the sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived. The years continued to roll by. Samuel grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the ranch management as Marcus's knees began to give him trouble. Rose shocked everyone by declaring her intention to become a teacher, and Marcus built a small school on the edge of town so she would have a place to teach. The twins, inseparable as always, worked the ranch together with an efficiency that amazed everyone. Marcus's hair turned gray at the temples, then white. Lines deepened around his eyes, those eyes that still looked at Olivia with the same love and devotion they had held 30 years earlier. Olivia's own hair silvered, and her hands grew gnarled from years of work, but she remained strong and vital, the heart of her family. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. It seemed like the entire town of Opal turned out, along with ranchers from miles around. Marcus and Olivia stood together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, by friends and neighbors, and marveled at the community they had helped build. 30 years, Marcus said that night as they prepared for bed. "Sometimes it feels like we just got married yesterday. Other times, I cannot remember what life was like before you." "I cannot imagine life without you," Olivia said, sitting at her dressing table and unpinning her hair. Through the mirror, she watched Marcus move around the bedroom they had shared for 3 decades. "You saved my life in more ways than one that day in the river." Marcus came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. In the mirror, she could see them both, aged but still strong, marked by time but not diminished. "We saved each other," he said. "I was so lonely before you came. I had the ranch, I had work, but I did not have a reason. You gave me that. You and our children, our life together. That is what makes it all worthwhile." Olivia reached up to cover his hands with her own. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had been even a minute later that day, if you had not seen me go under?" "I try not to think about it," Marcus admitted. "It is too terrible to contemplate. But I do think about how one moment can change everything. One decision, one action, and your entire life takes a different path. You decided to jump in after me. You could have thought it was too dangerous, that the river was too high, but you did not hesitate. How could I? There was someone in trouble. You do not think about danger in a moment like that. You just act." He kissed the top of her head. "Though I will admit, once I was in the water and felt that current, I had a moment of thinking we might both drown. But then I had you, and I knew I could not let go. I would get us both out, or we would go down together." Olivia turned in her seat to look up at him properly. I fell in love with you that very day, I think. Or at least the seeds of it were planted. You were so strong and brave, but also gentle. When you asked if I was all right, there was such genuine concern in your voice. You cared about a complete stranger. You were never a stranger, Marcus said softly. From the moment I saw you, something in me recognized you. I know that sounds foolish and romantic, but it is true. I looked at you sitting there on the riverbank, soaked and frightened but also brave, and I thought there she is, the person I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. They stood there in the lamplight, husband and wife for 30 years, and Olivia felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt as a young woman. Time had changed them, shaped them, but the essential connection remained. Marcus was still her hero, her partner, her greatest love. And she knew, looking in his eyes, that she was still all those things to him as well. The seasons turned. Winter gave way to spring, spring to summer, in the endless cycle that governed life on the ranch. Marcus's joints ached more in the cold, and climbing onto a horse became difficult. Olivia developed a cough that persisted through one entire winter, frightening them both until it finally cleared with the warm weather. They were getting old, both of them, though neither liked to admit it. But they had their children close by, had grandchildren running around the ranch yard just as their own children once had. The Broken Arrow continued to prosper under Samuel's management, with input from his siblings. It was a true family operation now, built on the foundation Marcus and Olivia had laid. On a warm summer evening in 1910, Marcus and Olivia sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. He was 72 now, she was 70. Their bodies were worn, but their spirits remained strong. They held hands, their fingers intertwined, comfortable in the silence that only decades together can bring. "Olivia," Marcus said suddenly, "if I could go back to that day at the river, knowing everything that would come after, I would not change a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, has led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." Olivia squeezed his hand. "Neither would I, not one single thing." They sat together watching the sun set over the land they loved, over the life they had built from a single moment of courage and chance. The river that had nearly taken Olivia's life had instead given her everything, had brought her to Marcus, and to this place where she truly belonged. As darkness fell, and the stars emerged, bright and numberless in the Wyoming sky, Marcus helped Olivia to her feet. They went inside together, to the home they had made, to the bed they had shared for more than 30 years. And as they drifted off to sleep, still holding hands as they always did, both knew that whatever time they had left would be spent together, just as it should be. Marcus Young had pulled Olivia Thorne from the river in the spring of 1878, but the truth was they had saved each other. He had given her life, and she had given him a reason to live it. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a love that had weathered every storm and grown stronger with each passing year. And when, years later, they were both finally laid to rest in the small cemetery outside Opal, they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the North Platte River, the river that had brought them together, under a sky as vast and eternal as the love they had shared.